small React app that's going to query a REST API, and we're going to try to display a list of authors and a list of books. And we're going to start off a pretty generic Create React app project that's open right here. I haven't done much to it. The only thing I've done was just to change some of the lint configuration here using the extended ESLint experimental feature of Create React App. And I added Prettier to the project. I'm also using JSON Server. I'm using this small JSON database that I created here that has a list of authors and a list of books. An author can have written multiple books. A book is written by one and only one author. And just to spice things up a little bit, I've also changed my configuration of the JSON server. I've added a little middleware here, Jitter. You can pass in a Express middleware to JSON server. Here, what I'm doing is that I'm just using it to kind of add a random delay to each network call just to make it a little bit more realistic, and I'm adding a 100 millisecond delay to it. So that's about it for my setup. It's fairly simple. And then I deleted everything except the app.jsx file here. And we're going to write all the code in here just so I don't spend my time going back and forth between different files. And let's get started. So I'm going to start by um, how am I going to start this? We have our div here, and well, I'm going to use a use reducer hook. There we are. And what this one does is it just takes a reducer and it takes an initial state. And the initial state is going to be an object that has a list of authors. And we're going to dispatch. That's for that hook. And we're going to pass a reducer function, and that function takes a state and an action. And the action always comes with a type. So we're going to take the type from the action, and we're going to write a switch statement around the app and around the type, sorry, and we're going to return state. And here, default, we're going to return state. And that's it for our reducer. Yeah, I'm getting a lint issue because dispatch is not used, but here's state, and we're going to use state. We're going to create an authors component, and authors component is going to take an authors object, an objects prop, and I'm going to destructor authors from state, and I'm going to pass it here. All right. Okay, so let's create our authors component. Okay, and so authors, and we're just gonna, well, it's a list, so we're gonna create a an unordered list, and we're gonna iterate over the authors object, and for each author, we're gonna pass it to an author object. Okay, and then one thing that I forgot is that I need to pass it a key. There's something terribly wrong. It might VS Code. I don't know what it is. So an author has a name and an ID, so I'm just going to use the ID here, and I'm going to create the author, and I'm going to pass it here. I'm going to create an author component. This is a pretty classic. We're going to take the name out of the author. Setup, you iterate over one element, you have one component, and then for each item, you have another component. And we're going to have a list item, and we're going to print the name. All right. Oh, we have something. Okay. What do we have? So we have a state with authors that we get from the state. We pass their authors component. We have an author's prop. We iterate over that. We have an author component, a key. That's about it. So if I know that I need an ID and a name. So if I do this, all right, that works. So we need to get this data from somewhere. So we're going to add a button. And when we click on this button, we're going to display, we're going to make a service call that's going to go fetch some data. And then that data is going to be added in our state. Before we do that, I find it useful to have a representation of the state on the screen. I could use the React DevTools, just like I could use a debugger, but sometimes just having a visual representation of something as something else happens while not necessarily debugging it is pretty useful. So this is exactly what we're going to do. And I can't print an object, but I can convert it to a string. And this is my state, and I can convert it to a string, put it on the screen. So here it is. And then I'm going to create this button, and this button, I'm going to call it load authors, and it's going to have an on click, and I'm going to fetch authors when I click it. All right, so const fetch authors, and I'm going to say, well, it's a sing because I'm going to make a service call. And here I'm going to say const response equals, we're going to use an await keyword, and we're going to fetch, and we're going to call authors. And this is going to work because in my package.json, I have this little line that tells create React app that if there's no asset, try to go look at that address for some sort of data. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. And we're going to do that. Okay. And then once I have my data, let's just print it just to make sure that we're getting something when we click this button. So if I go to console, yes, I'm getting a list of authors. So I'm now going to use dispatch. And when I dispatch, I'm going to use a type. And I'm going to say load authors success. And I'm going to use payload. And I'm going to pass it to JSON. And then in my reducer, when I go up to the top, I'm going to use the same action. I'm sorry, the same type, and I'm going to return. And state. I'm going to add some authors to my state, and that's going to be my action.payload. And here we go. Okay, cool. So that works. Now I want to do the same thing with books, right? I want a second button. When I click on that button, I want to fetch some books. So remember, we have our API here, and So that's the author details, and then that's the books, and that's the books endpoint. So we're going to use this endpoint, authors slash author ID slash books. So this means that, well, actually, we're going to use this endpoint, why bother, that is going to load um, all, all the books. And we're going to do it pretty much the same way. Load books, we're going to say const fetch books equals async, and we're going to use pretty much the same thing. Load books success, and it's assign. What is it saying? It's assign a value, but never used. Fetch. I'm missing fetch. Okay. So once load books success, I'm gonna come here. Load books success. Okay. Now what I need to do is for what I want to do is return state. There we go. Now I have my authors. I want to add something here. For each author, I want to add a list of books on the condition that it exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate over each author, and then for each author, add a list of books. I could do this by mapping over the authors and then looking through the list of books every time. It's not super efficient. It's kind of an n squared. So we're gonna do this a little bit differently. Now I know that the payload here are books. So action dot payload. I can structure it. I can set payload as books. And then I'm going to create a lookup table. Lookup table equals books.reduce. And that's going to take an accumulator, and it's going to take a book. And I'm going to say that book return accumulator, always return the accumulator. So that book now, here, if I look at my API, it's going to ID a title and author ID. I don't want to add the author ID, right? In my store, in my state, sorry, to my author. I don't want to add that because, well, I don't need it, right? If we go back here and we look at the authors. So I'm going to straight up structure that book to get the author ID, and that's new book. Okay. And here, oh, what I'm gonna do is return the accumulator and the key that is the author ID, and in this key, in my lookup table, the key is the author, and the value is all the books written by that author. So if it exists, so I'm going to do author ID. There we go. So I'm going to say author ID is either the accumulator of author ID. So if it's already been found, I'm going to use that. Or a new array and the new book. Okay? So that's my lookup table. And let's just print it to make sure that we actually have something that makes sense. Load authors, load books. Yeah, okay, that's good. And we're going to say return authors, and then state.authors.map, and then for each author and books, we're going to use our lookup table to set author ID, and if it's not found, we're just going to use an empty array. Load authors, load books. Perfect. What happens if I load books when there's no authors? Service call is made. Nothing happens. Load books, load authors. Okay, so that's one way to do it. The other way I want to do it is by using use effect hook. So it's very common that we want to load data when we land on the page. So the way that we're going to do this is by using a React use effect, and we're just going to use an empty array as a second parameter. So this is not called multiple times, and then we're just going to call fetch authors from this. That's it. Okay. So when I'm on the page, I load all the authors. I click on books. I load all the books. Okay, so the books are loaded. We want to display them. So the way that we're going to display them, we're going to go down to authors, and we know that now that author object that we're passing to the author component has some books, and we can get them. We can get them from here, right? And now what we can do is pretty much what we've done above for. We can create a books component. We did this above for the authors, so we're going to do it for the books. It's easy as that. And we're going to say return, and it's going to be an unordered list, and we're going to iterate on the books. And on the books, we're going to say map book, and for each book, we're going to pass it to a book component. Book equals book, and then we're going to create a book component, and it's going to take a book, and from the book component, a book just has a title, so we're going to take the title from the book, and we're going to return a list item that has a title. All right, and something wrong here with I'm missing parentheses. Again, something's wrong. I need, first, I need an ID. So it's unique. And the other thing that I'm doing wrong is that when, and this is why this is crashing, the first time authors are loaded, there's no books. So here I'm going to call map on undefined. So I want to put a check somewhere. Hey, well, something's up. I don't want to put the check in the books component. Simply, I could put it like I could do something here. I guess I could. Let me think. Yeah, I can't do a ternary here because I believe I always need to return something, and React is gonna complain. I'm sorry, this is not ID, this is key. React is gonna complain if I don't return something. So let's verify. If I write this, I think it's gonna say just like, hey, you should return something. And yeah, yeah, nothing was returned from render. Render has to return something. So I'm just gonna do a ternary here, return null. Okay, so load books, load authors, load books. The books disappear when I click on load authors because the whole list is replaced. We're not merging data or anything like that. We're doing this. And then we also load it when we load the thing. So we could also, let's see what else we could do here. Maybe we wanna load. We could we could add a button. Let's do that. Let's add a button where we can click on an author and load the books for just that one author. So let's do that. All right. So here we have our authors component. What we're going to do is that we're going to add an on click on the author because the author shouldn't need to know what happens when you click it. All it needs to know is that it can be clicked, right? That's functional programming for you. Just tell me what I'm doing, not how, something like that. So we're going to do a non-click. Oh, I'm sorry, not on this. We're going to add it um, next to um, next to the name, and we're going to do that. We're going to say we're going to just use a little icon. We're going to say plus on click equals on click because we don't really know what we're doing. So maybe we want to clear the books. Who knows? So I'm just going to on click. And authors now. So authors here needs a non-click, and when it gets a non-click, it's gonna get it's gonna do let's call it it's not let's we call everything else fetch. So fetch books by author ID. We already have a fetch books. Here we have a fetch books by author ID. So implicitly it means that here my fetch books by author ID, implicitly I'm saying that it's taking a parameter, and that parameter is the author ID. And here if we look at my on click, it's just being called like that, which is not great. So what we're gonna do, which is we're gonna pass it. Now we have the ID here. We're just gonna pass it the author ID to the on click. And now we know that this, whenever called, is going to receive the author ID. So that's what we're going to do. And we have our endpoint here. So that's exactly what we're going to be calling. Const response equals await fetch. And we're going to call it their author's books. And we're going to pass in an author ID here. And const JSON equals await response dot JSON dispatch, and we're going to pass it type. We're going to call it load books. What do we call it? Load books by author success. Yeah, that sounds good. Oop. And payload is going to be the books, right? So the payload is going to be the books, and this is the first time we're going to have a payload that's an object, um, because that JSON object here, um, there we go, is the books. And we're also going to have to pass it the author ID because in our reducer, we need to know which author we're getting books for, right? So when we click on that button, we're going to pass in books and the author. The author load books. Perfect. So load books by author. We're going to have another case here. And we're going to say const. And we're going to have a payload. And our payload is going to be some books. And it's going to be an author ID. And that's from the action. And I'm going to say, so I need to iterate over all the, so state, and that doesn't change. And then I need to iterate over all my authors. And what I'm going to do is that if I have a match, so if the author ID is the one for which I just fetched the books, I'm going to alter it slightly. I'm going to create a new instance. I'm going to pass it the books that I got here. Else, I'm just going to return it unchanged. And load books, that still works. And then carry JD Solinger. Load authors, that should right. That should clear it out. So we know this works. We know this works. If I change my DB and I remove that one book, I click on this, it should come back, or now it should come back. If I remove this one, which one did I carry? So Stephen King, there we go. Stephen King. That's it. And there's my store. I don't know what else I can do. I can explain why I decided to make this little video. Well, the reason for that video is that I wrote an article on Medium. I'll post the link under the description of this video, where I explained the problem, a problem that I often have with REST APIs is that here I have my API, right? And I'm getting my books, I'm getting my books and my authors, but I can never get authors and books at the same time. So if I'm not the author of the API, if I don't control it, I want to alter it, and I wish I could make only one service call to get all the authors and all their books in one go, I can't. I'm not the author of this API, so I have to fetch the authors and then either fetch the books individually or fetch all the books and then match them to their author, which is what I did here. I'm sorry, which is what I did here with this little bit of logic. It's not very readable, but it works. Um, and it happens all the time, right? Um, GraphQL in the article, I was explaining that perhaps it's a good alternative because it's a query language for your API. You can say either you return me all the authors, or you return me all the books, or you return me the authors and their books, or you return me the first 5 authors and their books, or not, whatever. Um, so I hope this kind of clarifies it. I'm trying to think if I want to do anything else, but I think that's it. So thanks for watching. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments. Thanks.